to ITE 2132. I am Dr. Surangika Ranatunga from University of Moratuwa. In this module, we will be learning object-oriented programming. In order to practice the object-oriented programming concept, we will be using the Java programming language. So in this first lecture, we will be looking into the basics of Java programming. If you are very familiar with the Java programming fundamentals, you may omit this video. If not, please go through this video and brush up your basic knowledge on Java programming. So just like in the other lectures in this series and the other modules, we'll be using the same color coding. In this module, you will be able to identify the basic elements of Java syntax and semantics, and you will be able to apply those syntax and semantics in developing a very simple Java programming with one class. So we will be using this Hailstone Sequence simple algorithm as a running example throughout this lecture. In this Hailstone Sequence algorithm, we start with the positive integer n. If this n is even, the next number is n divided by 2. If n is odd, then the next number is 3n plus 1. We repeat these moves until we reach 1. So I encourage you to pause this video here for a minute and try to come up with the pseudocode for this simple Hailstone sequence algorithm. Now, as you can see here, we have to write a piece of code that repeats and repeatedly looking at the value n and take some decision. So this inherently means that we'll have to use some kind of a loop. So in this case, we are using the while loop. We have to use the while loop because we are now going to check a condition. The condition is whether our number has reached 1. So this is a good example to understand some fundamentals in Java syntax. So as you can see here, we have used curly brackets. Curly brackets are used to group set of statements. So here we have a while loop and we have an if block and an else block. The outer braces correspond to the while block, and inside that we have the if and the else blocks. So other than this while, if and else lines, other statements should be ended with the semicolon. So for example, n equals n divided by 2 ends with the semicolon. It is a must in Java. So as you can see, we have nicely indented this code. It is not mandatory in Java to use this kind of indentation. However, for a human, it is very easy to look at the code and understand if you have used proper indentation. Although not shown here, you can use comments to add any instructions or some details about your code. So if it is a single line of a comment, you can use a double slash, or you can use the slash and the asterisk to get a comment block. So here you see two control statements, while and if. So for the while and if, we had to give some conditions. These conditions are given within the parentheses. So here for while we say n not equal to 1. And for if, we are checking the remaining value of the division by 2. So this small code shows the use of different operators as well. The commonly used operators in Java include the plus sign, minus, multiplication, division, greater than, less than, likewise. And the special symbol, the exclamation and the equal sign going together means not equal to. So in the while loop, we have this condition n not equal to 1. And if you just have the exclamation mark alone, it means not, the negation. And here, for the if condition, you have this percentage operator. We call it the modulo operator. That means this, when you use this operator, it will return or it will give you the remainder when the n is divided by the other number. So here, when n is divided by 2, the remainder is 0. So if you write n divided by 2, the answer will be that value. For example, n, if it is n, let's say n equals 4, 4 divided by 2 equals 2. But we say 4 modulo 2 is 0, because when 4 is divided by 2, we don't have any remainder. So spend some time to familiarize with these different operators and control sequences. Now we are going to improve our simple Hailstone sequence program even further. So as you can see, inside the while loop, we are having this n. This n is called a variable. However, in Java, you cannot use this n just like this, because Java compiler does not know what this n is. So we have to define what this n is. N is called a variable, and now this variable has to be declared. So that is what we show in this first line, int n. This is called declaring a variable. In Java, every variable must be declared before being used. And remember, just declaring variable is not enough. If you are actually going to use that variable in any place of your code, you have to initialize as well. For example, now here we declare the variable as int n, and in the next line we initialize it. That means n equals 3. If you try to use the variable n without initializing, you will get an error. So this integer n is called a primitive data type. So in Java, we have two types of variables, primitive and object. So integer, long, boolean, double, and char are called primitive types. You can define different other variables using objects. So in the next week, you will learn that Java and object-oriented programming is based on the concept of objects. So you can use these objects as variables. A very commonly used an inbuilt variable in Java is called the string. So string refers to an object that represents a sequence of characters. So you can define your own object types as well. However, you cannot define the primitive types. So this is common to many other programming languages as well. They have a well-defined fixed set of primitive types, and you cannot add your own primitive types. Another thing you have to learn about the variables is the typing. So there are two types of typing, static versus dynamic. Static typing or compile time typing means the type of the variable should be known before the program runs. For example, in the previous code, the type of the variable n should have been defined. So that is called static typing. In contrast, dynamic or runtime typing means the type of the variable is known while only when the program is running. In Java, what we have is static typing. In other words, if you want to use a variable, you have to declare it using the type of that variable. For example, here we say n variable is of type int. So when there are different types of variables, you cannot just use them or combine them in any arbitrary way you want. For example, now here we have integer n, and then we have the string representation of the character 2. If you try to combine these two like this, we will get an error. So if you know Python, you would know that what Python has is dynamic typing. So according to the programming language, we will have to decide and use the variables along with the typing mechanism they are using. So just by having this while loop, you cannot execute it in Java. Because in Java, every piece of code should be within a class. So class is a block of code, and it is identified as a class by using this keyword class. And for each class, we had to give a unique name. So here, this class has the name Hailstone. You can have any number of classes in your program depending on the requirement of your solution. However, remember, there has to be one class that carries this special method, which you call the main, or the public static void main method. So this is very important because the public static void main method is the place where the Java runtime environment hooks into your program. In other words, the Java runtime environment will start executing your program by executing this public static void main. So whatever the program you write, at least at least it should have one class, and there has to be this public static void main method inside one class. So here now we have packed our Hailstone sequence logic inside the public static void main. You can now try writing this code and see whether it works for you. So public static void main is not the only method that we can have in our programs. We can define any number of methods as per our requirement. So here, for example, I have defined a new method called isEven. It takes a parameter. So within the bracket, what we give, we call the parameters. It takes one parameter of type in. So whatever the values or information the method needs to execute the logic, we can give as parameter. And a method can have a return value. So here, Boolean is the return type. So whatever the value that can come out of this method should be of the Boolean type. So we can use this isEven method inside the another method. So here isEven is used inside the main method. When a method is used inside another method, we call the method is being called. In other words, we can say isEven method is called by the main method. So since the isEven method returns a Boolean value, we can capture that value inside the main method by using this Boolean variable. Another very important construct in Java is the string. So we are going to write a new method which will return our Hailstone sequence as a piece of string. So before that, let's look at the basics of strings. String can be defined as an object representing a sequence of characters. That means a piece of text. And these strings can be concatenated using the plus sign. So here we see the string representation of the character 8 and the string representation of character 4 give us the string representation 8, 4. So don't get confused. Here we are not adding integers. So if we have integers, 8 plus 4 should be equal to 12. What you have here is the string or the character representation of these numbers. So they are being treated as text. So something you have to remember is that the string objects are immutable. That means once created, these objects will never change. So when you concatenate 8 and 4, 8 and 4 string objects will not change, but there will be a new object that corresponds to the string 84. There are various methods to manipulate the string. For example, if you want to get the length, you can use the length method. And if you want to get the character at a particular position in this string, you can use the char add. And if you want to get the piece of the main string, you can use the substring method, which is substr. So I encourage you to refer to the Java doc, the Java documentation to understand and use these methods. It will be a good practice for you to learn how to refer to this Java documentation and learn from that. So here's the code now we have written to return the created Hailstone sequence as a string. So one thing you have to remember, now we have to start this code, the sequence with the original number. That means the integer n that comes into this method as a parameter. So now n should be the first character, whatever the value of n will be the first character in our sequence. So that means a sequence should be initialized with that integer value. However, if you just try to write like this, string sequence equal n, you will get an error because n is of the type integer, and SCQ. Seek is the type of string. So they are not compatible. So you simply cannot assign an integer to a variable of type string. So what if you want to do that, you have to use this special method called value of, which will convert the integer into its string representation. So we can initialize our string object using that. And then we execute our usual while loop, and whatever the new numbers we generate, we append to our sequence. And at the end of the while loop execution, this string sequence will be returned from the method. Another very useful construct in Java and in many other programming languages is the array. So in this example, we look how we can return the created Hailstone sequence as an array. So in order to indicate that this method Hailstone array has a return type of an integer array. So what are these arrays? Array is a fixed length sequence of values. An array can contain either primitive types or objects. So if it is objects or if it is primitive type, it has to be related data type. So that means we can have an integer array to include integers, and if it is object, these objects should be of the same type or of related types. And if you want to create a new array, you will have to use the new keyword. And when you are creating arrays, you can specify the number of elements that will be there in the array. And similar to strings, you can execute many operations in arrays. For example, if you look at this first line, int array 0 equals 200, we'll assign the value 200 to the 0th position of the array. So now keep in mind, arrays and strings, we start the counting with index value 0. So the 0 position of the array means the first element in the array. So if you execute this line, at the end we will have an array where the first element will have the value 200. And similarly, you can use array square bracket 0 to take the element that is stored at the first position of the array. And if you want to get the length of the array, you can use array dot length. So the difference between array and string, so there are many differences. So one difference that is notable is, while string is immutable, arrays are mutable. That means the elements in the array can be changed. So as you can see here, using this first statement, we can set the value of a particular position in the array. However, once created, the length of the array cannot be changed, but you can change the elements included in the array in any way you want. Now here's the code we have written to demonstrate how we can pack the Hailstone sequence numbers into an array and return. So as you can see here, now we have an array, and we have to store every new number created. We have to store in the array in a sequential manner. So the first value should go to the 0th position of the array. So in order to handle that, we have defined a new integer I. So and it is initialized to 0. So when the while loop is executed for the very first time in this first statement, array I equals n, I will carry the value 0. That means when it is executed, the 0th position or the first element in the array will be set to the value n. So this below table show, or the visualization of the array shows how these numbers are changed. In the first position, that means I equals 0, we have the first value of n, and in the second position, that means I equals 1, we have the second value of n. Likewise, we will be storing the values of n as we execute the while loop, and we will be filling the array. So there are other operations we can execute on the array. For example, if you want, you can write a small piece of code to find the maximum value of an array. So in order to do that, we initialize a variable max and set it to 0. That means currently our maximum value is 0. So, and then we are going through the array. How are we going to go through the array? We can use a simple for loop. You start with the 0th element and then we go one by one and reading the elements in this array. So as we read each and every element, that means array I, we check the element value and see if it is greater than the current maximum value, the int max value. If it is higher than the current max value, we set the max value to the new value. That means the value of the current element in this array. So this concludes the discussion on the basic elements in Java programming. In the next week, we will look at how to construct object-oriented programs using the concept of objects and classes.